Okay, welcome everybody to the last part of ancient Roman art. And we will probably be able to end 5 or 10 minutes earlier than usual. It depends on how many questions you have. But first, a couple of announcements. So let me go ahead and go to the speaker view here. Okay, so your papers, everyone knows we're due on Monday by midnight. But if anybody, and I think there's still 2 or 3 people who haven't had a chance, or for whatever reason, that's your business. If you turn them in by, let's say, Monday before class starts, that would be the cutoff, because then it's literally 7 days after the due date. They will only be 5 points off for being late instead of 10. And after that, from the time class starts on Monday for the rest of the semester, any late paper from this first assignment that's submitted after 1 week late is 10 points off. I think I've said that like 4 times, but sometimes people aren't quite focused on that. So if you needed more time, you can take it. But if I were you, quick word to the wise, I would try to get them in before the next class, not just because the extra 5 points that could make a difference in your final grade. I've seen people miss an A by 3, 4, 5 points, and I have to keep those standards. Otherwise, I'm not doing my job. And following the college district rules, of course, about consistent grading standards. So I have to keep those standards. But the other reason is that you don't want to backlog yourself. I mentioned that on Monday when I talked about that, because we've got then review on next Monday is a review for the midterm, and that'll be the whole period. And then we're going to have the midterm 1 week from today, and then you've got spring break, and I hope you want to relax and not just have to worry about late assignments and getting caught up. So hopefully you'll get them in before that 1 week deadline if you still haven't turned your papers in. Also, I'm starting to get some extra credit very slowly, little by little, but nobody's come up with more than 20. You guys still have plenty of opportunities. Let me hi, welcome. We're talking about the papers. If there's anyone who hasn't yet turned, the vast majority did turn them in on time, but 5 points off is all that'll be deducted for lateness if you get them in before class starts next Monday. Then it's 10 points. Okay, extra credit options. I'm thinking, I think I said this, I can't remember now, on Monday, but I'm about 3/4 of the way decided, depending on what happens with the whole, COVID guidelines. But at the moment, the way it's looking, I think it'll be safe to offer an optional extra credit activity, which is not a school related. It's not a JC sponsored. That's a really important thing. It's not a field trip. It's if you want to join an event that I do on my own anyway, which is walking tours, where we go inside anywhere from 2 or 3 to 4, maybe, historic homes, or even other buildings besides homes that aren't open to the public, where I know the owners because those buildings have been in one of the books I wrote on architecture. And it's a unique opportunity to see some beautiful historic sites that you wouldn't otherwise have a chance. So that would be on a Sunday in May, probably closer to the week before, and it would be in Berkeley, by the way. And it would be 2 to 4:30. And all you have to do is attend and sign in with whoever my assistant will be that day. And if you hadn't, there's a small fee. It's $20. That's because it's a lot of work to organize these things, but it's a lot of fun too. And so, of course, you drive yourself, and I'd give you, the point at where we all are meeting, the starting point would be easy to find. And it would be in a neighborhood where parking on Sunday. That's one reason I'm doing Sunday. You don't have to worry about meters and stuff. So that would be in May, and it would be 20 points. And you can bring a guest. They, of course, wouldn't get extra credit unless they're in one of my current classes. Okay, I'll tell you more about that as it gets closer. Certainly by mid-April, I will have been able to make that decision. And if I do decide to go forward, I will give you plenty of notice, both in the Zoom lectures and by email, maybe twice before the event itself, like 2 weeks in advance at least. Okay, any questions before we start with today's remaining slides? And these, I'm going to do my own slides of Rome, because the 3 remaining slides, I have better views of those sites than the ones from the slide library sources or internet sources that I'd used for the other Roman historic art slides. And so you'll see a bunch of slides where you don't have to take notes, and I'll tell you, of course, when we get to the 3 remaining must-know slides. Before we do that, anybody have any questions about papers? I already covered the deadline. I think that's, or what happens if you turn something in late. That's pretty straightforward. Or extra credit or anything else, because we're going to cover the midterm and how to study, cut the list down by at least 40% on the slide must know list. I mean, and about at least 30% on the list of terms before we, have the test. So you'll have plenty of notice. Okay, those are slides you won't need to study, or terms that you won't need to review. And it's an open book test. Everyone knows by now, open book, open up. Okay, no questions at the moment. Of course, I'll stick around afterwards. All right, let's get started with our first slide. Now, for the first few, you don't have to take notes, but let me make sure you guys can see this. Okay, can everybody see this? Yes?
Yes.
Good, thank you. These are my own slides from a number of different trips. And if you've been, following as on Monday, when we covered a bunch of must-know slides, of which at least one of the ones Monday will be on the slide essay or analysis part of the midterm. And that would be in this slide. There it is, the Colosseum. You see how close it is to the Forum. So this is not must-know. I'll tell you, we get a few slides from now, but you can just relax and just listen for the next few slides. So this is the Roman Forum. That word is still used, I mean, by a lot of countries. Even the exact spelling, that's a Latin word, to come together is what it means. So this is where all the government activities and many, not all, but many of the most important temples were gathered together in one area. And of course, this was the center of the empire. And there, obviously, almost all the temples are in ruin, except for one. We're going to see this one up close. This one's still functioning as a now Catholic church. We'll talk about that. But this is the god of temple, dedicated to the god of war, Mars, the Romans called him. Yeah, the planet is named after that god. And it was built by Augustus when he was, just beginning his reign of 45 years. So let's go take a slightly closer look, and then we'll take a walk down this path, so to speak, virtually, of course, or digitally. Most of it is in such ruin that many people would say, oh, well, where are the buildings? But as you get, down into the path, like this one here is still completely standing. It's missing only the pediment. And this arch is one of the must-knows we're going to see. And when we get to that, I'll tell you. That's intact. So there, and of course, the Colosseum is 2/3 intact. It would be 100% if it weren't for that Pope that stole a bunch of the stone, from the outer walls. So it's not that these things weren't well built or that they collapsed from an earthquake or something. That's not what happened. It was abandoned when the barbarians took over Rome, and Rome, the empire and the city itself, fell to barbarian invaders. No one was using this. So it got buried under hundreds of years of soot, silt, whatever, dirt, earth, and all that was sticking up were some of the tops of some of these temples. If you see old engravings from, 400 or 500 years ago, all that you could have seen of the Forum was the tops of some of the structures like this triumphal arch, for instance, and the temple I just showed you. Okay, so this is the hill I showed. Was it one slide or two? Let me just double check there. Actually, you guys got a break on this, but up here are the wealthier, like senators, right, and noble families' homes. This would be one of them, the fancier homes for the wealthy and upper classes. They liked being walking distance from the Forum, especially if you're a senator. You're supposed to go, to the Senate at least several days a week, and supposedly you debate things. Of course, it was just a show. It was a front, whatever you want to call it. The real power resided with the emperor, of course, and the army that he commanded. But they still had their meetings and things. So Roman senators, most of them would have had, and their families, their homes up here on this hill. You don't have to know the name. It's called the Palatine Hill. So let's move now on to my favorite, corny slide though it is. the cats of Rome, when I was there, there was somebody who was brilliant marketer. He was an Italian American. I think he was dual citizenship. He spoke English. I mean, I saw him interviewed on Italian TV, I think it was, called Il Gatti di Roma. Every year he came out with a different calendar of different parts of the city of Rome where cats were collected. Feral, of course, they were mostly feral cats like these. And it was brilliant. It sold like, this is pre-internet, of course, literally tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of copies every year to tourists and, of course, Italian citizens. So I don't think that's one of the views he used. It's just one I caught. This cat here is resting on a piece of the Roman Forums Road. It's called we'll see it as we go along towards the existing standing temples and arches. It's called the Via Forum Romanum, which meant the way or road through the Roman Forum. That's that temple I showed you earlier. So we'll just take a slightly closer look. These columns probably remain standing with dirt up to about this level, over halfway up during the Middle Ages when they were abandoned, before the excavations by archaeologists began. Of course, it's missing almost the rest, everything except the portico is gone. These are marble columns, and Augustus was the one who recreated almost all of the older temples that were built out of brick or soft stone. He replaced them with marble and made new upgraded buildings in their place. And then these are marble, of course, and you see how much brickwork there is. So probably the bottom level of this goes back hundreds of years before the marble section, which would be during Augustus's time, and that was roughly right around 2,000 years ago, the turn of the millennium when he became emperor. This is the temple, or what's left of it, of the Vestal Virgins. A few of you may have heard of them. They were 15 virgins, usually around 14 or 15, when the Roman emperor or some of his staff would pick them from various families, usually upper class, but not always, who were well educated and considered to be appropriate for a lifetime of service to the Roman gods. They didn't have to do anything unpleasant, but they kind of were prisoners in a padded cell, that phrase, or prisoners in paradise. They got to have a whole complex. This is just one little section of what they had, but they weren't allowed to leave except on religious holidays when they would be in a parade along with the emperor and his family. And they were supposed to keep the flame. Their job was to keep the eternal flame burning. Eternal flames, there's another tradition that Roman Empire created that concept. The idea that if you keep a flame burning, you don't lose the memory of those people that came before you, A, and B, it also is a symbol of the continuing, of that culture or that country, that kingdom. So the fire they kept burning never burned out for hundreds of years until just before the fall of Rome. It did burn out. I don't even know why it went out, maybe in a storm. So maybe it was an omen. I don't know. That's what the Romans would have thought from their gods. So that's all that's left of this marble section of it. It was a round section, and then they lived in very nice quarters, but they weren't allowed to marry. That's why they were called Vestal Virgins, and they had to get permission to go out if they need to visit a family member who was ill or dying. Most of the time they were kept in the grounds here, and of course they got lots of fancy clothes and good food, but I don't think that's a trade-off most people would choose. But they had no choice. The emperor picked them. That's where they would be for the rest of their lives. Okay, this is one of the few intact temples. It's missing only the pediment. The walls are intact, the stairs, and the interior is still functioning as a Catholic church. This may be obvious, is not Roman. It should be obvious. That's Baroque, a style that we don't cover in this class because we don't get to that point of history. About 1620, the year, in fact, the Pilgrims landed in Massachusetts. So it's just about exactly 400 years old, but it's a facade attached to the original 2,000-year-old Roman temple. So who was this temple dedicated to? These massive columns are very impressive. It was dedicated to the deceased wife of Marcus Aurelius. Now, we covered him. I'm pretty sure I have that right? Didn't we get to the equestrian statue of Marcus? Yeah, that was the last slide we did, I think, on Monday. He was the last Roman emperor during the Pax Romana, the last one to rule over a period of peace and stability. And he was very popular, relatively reform-minded as emperors go. I mean, he was still a despot, but an enlightened despot, unlike some of the despots we're seeing these days in the news. But anyway, he as I said earlier, he paused and totally stopped, but he paused for many years the persecution of the Christians and Jews and other minorities. And he was well educated. His wife was like his life partner. He only married once, and when she died years before he did, he could have married any eligible citizen of Rome, but he didn't. He grieved over her. So this temple was erected by the Roman Senate in honor of her. And you'll see a portrait of her in a minute. These are 60-foot tall columns of solid marble, and they're still supporting, the lower level, what would have been called the frieze underneath the pediment. That's the road we were talking about where the cats were lying on that paving stones. It's part of it that leads to, we'll get to that, and that'll be the first must know, that arch in the distance. But I meant to say this is actually the road. That was a footpath beside the road. Okay, this is over 2,500 years old, this road. So it had already been around more than, when this temple was built, because he ruled until 180, so somewhere around like 175, maybe 5 before he died, his wife died. I'm talking about Marcus Aurelius. So this temple is close to what? It's over 1,800 years old, 18th centuries. Already by that time, the paving stones here in front of the temple, this road that's from which all the other roads eventually converged, the phrase I used it earlier, the Roman road system was so thorough that all roads lead to Rome was not just a cliche, it was true. They eventually all linked up to where you could, if you kept going, you could get to this forum. So there it is, the Via Forum Romanum. It was already 6 or 7 centuries old when Marcus Aurelius was emperor. So now let's go take one more close up of this. And that's her, that's his wife. She's supposedly in heaven. They called it the Elysian Fields, their version of an afterlife. It's very similar to the idea of the Christian concepts of heaven, quote unquote. But that's about a 1/3 life. So she was a dancer. He met her when he was a young man before he was emperor. They really had a lifelong love. They had several children, none of whom were dysfunctional. Oh, that's not true. Commodus was, right? Commodus, the one that was played by the character Joaquin Phoenix played. The next emperor, he was dysfunctional. But Marcus Aurelius had several other children who were, very well educated and enlightened, and they had a happy family, happy marriage. And then when she died, they never quite got over it. So this is dedicated to her. It's a piece of the cornice line that would have been, up above when the temple was intact. It would have been there, probably in the front, probably. Okay, now let's go to the first must know, which is this. Let me get to, well, yeah, that's right. I always forget I interspersed. Actually, it wasn't me. It was the slide librarian who did that. Okay, so we're going to go back to this. Here it is, the Arch of Titus. This one, the Arch of Titus. Okay, so here it is, the title of the next must know, Arch of Titus. And that's just like the word arch is in Titus. The name of a Roman emperor is Titus.
Sorry to interrupt. I think we already did Arch of Titus. It was the first slide of last week.
Good. You know what? Thank you. I thought so, but I teach the same slides with slight variations, and that's not always easy to remember. Thank you. I was thinking we did. It seemed that is a good thing because I don't have a slide here. Apparently, when a slide librarian, I'd forgotten this. I haven't shown these slides in a couple semesters. Did this selection for me, transferred my old 35 millimeter slides onto digital format. She either forgot or just didn't notice the one of the details. So you guys remember then that the inside of this has a scene from the fall of Jerusalem. Okay, good. Well, we don't need to take much time with that then. Certainly we'll be able to end at least a few minutes early. But I thought I want you to see the context of because it's there. You see at the end of the Roman Forum. It's at near one end of the Roman Forum. And you can see here how massive it is. But we already covered it. Good. Don't need to take any more notes. And then if you missed that Monday lecture, of course, it'll be by 8 p.m. or sooner, probably than that, on YouTube by this Friday before 8 p.m. All right. So that means we only have a couple more, but they're both pretty important ones that when we get to those will be 2 that I haven't shown you. But most of these slides you can just listen in. This is not a must know. This is the Arch of Septimus Severus. Severus. You don't have to write that name. but it's an interesting little bit of historical, again, echoing in the presence of an historical name or phenomena. The word to be severe comes from his name. And was this guy severe? He had secret police, spies all over the Roman Empire, but especially in Italy and Rome itself. He managed to stay alive for 20 years as emperor when it was normal for most Roman emperors to be assassinated by their own bodyguards or a rival within 2 or 3 years. This is during the decline of the empire. This was built after Pax Romana. You have to know this, but I just think it's an interesting phenomenon because every society has its period of growth, and then maybe if they're lucky, a couple of centuries of stability. Yeah, we'll see if that is still true for us. And then sometimes a rapid, more often a slow, steady, or uneven decline. The Roman Empire did have some high points again after this. This guy ruled in the early 200s, which is the most corrupt period of the Roman Empire. Like I said, he's the only emperor that lasted more than a few years. He did that through a network of terror, quite literally. And when he captured, or even if he just had suspicions of somebody being critical, let alone actually perhaps trying to overthrow him, they were there, and there were whole families, there were extended network of friends, and even colleagues, whatever work they did, all of them would be arrested and mocked and tortured, usually to death. And then, of course, made a public spectacle. So this is an illustration on here, these bas-relief figures of him having his soldiers round up his enemies for future execution. And so it's one of the better preserved arches. You can see it's nearly intact. And that actually is the early Roman Latin. See, that means the Senate and the people of Rome. That's what that stands for. And so he was able to, keep ahead of his enemies and any potential assassins for a good 20 years. That's the longest of any Roman emperor's rule in the century after Marcus Aurelius died. Okay, now this is going to be the first must know. I believe that's right. Yeah, after the midterm. So I'm not going to give you the notes on it, but I think you might. These are nice slides. It's one of the most beautiful arches, or triumphal arch, right? We covered what that is. You have the definition that might appear. That I won't be cutting that term from the list of definitions that you need to study for the midterm, which I'll remind you of on Monday when we do the review. So you don't have to write that term again. Obviously, you should have that definition, but this is probably, well, it is, it's not probably, it's definitely the most ornate and most intact of all the Roman triumphal arches. It got decorations carved on almost every square inch, and it does depict the victory of Constantine, which I'll give you more information when we do the notes, but you don't have to write this now, over his enemies who tried to I think there's another civil war actually, where a couple of rivals decided they would take the throne away from him, and he had just been emperor for a couple of years. So he won that battle. We're talking about Constantine. I hope I said that right. But it's called, well, I said Arch of Constantine. That's what it's named for. And here he is. I might have a close-up of that. I don't think I do. Yeah, I don't. So let's just, I'll show it to you in large format. This is him accepting the surrender of the enemy commanders, and he showed mercy because he had just converted to Christianity. Literally on the night before the battle, he said he saw a vision of a fiery cross. I'll repeat this, of course, when we see this slide the week after the midterm. And he actually somehow decided that meant he should give mercy to all of the defeated soldiers and their commanders or officers. Usually they would have been executed, and the soldiers, defeated army soldiers, sold into slavery, but he let them go home in peace. So he was the first Christian emperor, or at least the first openly avowed one. And that's what this is a monument to, both that fact that he converted himself and his family, and later the empire in general. Not everyone, of course, but the majority of people in the empire within a few decades after he changed from a pagan, quote unquote, earlier Roman gods that he believed in, he was raised to believe in, to, quote, Christian God, the Bible, what have you. All of those teachings, which he adopted in his early years as emperor. And so he stopped totally, permanently stopped the persecution from that point forward in the Roman Empire. religious minorities, not just Christians, but Jews and Gypsies and others. Okay, so this is really a beautiful monument. Look at the life-size images of Roman soldiers and the victory angel or angel of victory. It's in very good shape for how it is. Now we're going to take, we've already covered the Colosseum. Again, don't need to take new notes. And if you missed the Monday class, you want to watch those when I post them from Monday's lecture. There's a lot of facts about the meaning of this that I already gave you. But just for now, some of you will have experiences like this when you travel. Especially if you go to a place like Rome, where there are really ancient monuments next to less, but still historic buildings, and then modern ones, as you see all over other parts of the world, especially Europe and Asia. People who might not know anything about history coming in tour buses, here's an example of this. The day I took these slides, there was a very large tour bus. I don't think I got it in my pictures here. Yeah, it was parked right here. And I remember the group of people. It was a tour group from Teaneck, New Jersey. Don't ask me why. I actually know someone from that town. It's almost a cliche. What does that mean? I don't know. It's just a middle class suburb outside of New York City. They were a group of tourists, American, of course, tourists. They got out, and two of the women who were friends stood here looking up at the scaffolding. And I think everyone knows what that's for, right? It's to clean the building from the pollution of all the cars and trucks and buses. So one of them looked up at the scaffolding and said, "Why do you think they have that there, Ethel?" And the other one said, "I don't know, Mabel, unless that's what's been holding the building up all these years." Unclear on the concept. Nope, that's not what it's for. Not even close. I almost said something I said, "Oh, just let them think what they want to think." Okay, so let's go up close, and you're going to see something that might be news to many of you, unless you actually take a tour of this or have read about this. During World War II, when Rome finally was liberated by American and British soldiers from the Nazis, right, from their occupation, there was a firefight inside this temple. Well, it's not temple, sorry, I meant to say the Colosseum. And you'll see the evidence of it. And I'll briefly say how that ended, but let's walk up into it. And then underneath the arches, it's really amazing. See, these look like they just worn out from time and weather. No, this is where the marble cladding was stripped away by hammer and chisel by that Pope in the Renaissance, who stole not just that one whole wall, but even some of the rest of it. And there are some, though. Here, that's almost certainly from the fighting in World War II. So what did happen? Well, these are some of these from a firefight. What happened is about something like 200 SS troops refused to surrender when the rest of the Germans occupying Rome already had surrendered to the Allies, right? And they were taking pot shots. They were, snipers and, with long range rifles, killing, civilians in the street after the fall of Rome to, the liberating armies of the Americans. So the American commander who had just taken over Rome had a very difficult decision. He could call in aircraft to kill those, SS assassins, that's what they were, of course, in the middle of Rome, thereby saving, lives, both his own soldiers and the citizens who lived near the Colosseum. Or he could send in a unit of American soldiers to fight hand-to-hand combat. He chose the latter. Now, that's dedication to art, because dozens of American soldiers died fighting, close quarters, rifles, handguns, probably a couple of grenades, but that saved the Colosseum from almost certain destruction. And it is a World Heritage Site even before that term existed. So, that's one of those stories you probably never hear, but that's what some of these things are, not all of them. Some of them are bullet holes from that firefight. It took 2 days to clean those SOBs, pardon my French, out of here. And none of them surrendered. They all fought to the death. Little known chapter of history there, involving more recent events in a much more ancient structure. Here's the side of the building where the Pope I was just talking about in the Renaissance stole that outer wall. So what's left is still the inner wall, of course, of combined brick and stone. Let's go underneath these arches into the Colosseum. Can you imagine 70,000 people? And these seats here, of course, they were bleachers. These were the bleacher seats, right? The cheap seats. Some today would say nosebleed seats, where you might not get a good view, but you could still see enough that, many thousands of people chose if they couldn't, get there in time, or they, You didn't have to pay. I mean, sometimes it was a fee, certain events, but mostly they were free. So it mattered as to which event it was, how many people came, but up to 70,000 people standing or sitting in this Colosseum at one time. And of course, watching blood sports, literally cheering on, the mass bloodshed that happened. And these are where these, of course, this was a floor originally. No one here I know has been to Italy. I've said already several times, but one or two of my students in the last couple of semesters who had been said that this has been heavily restored now. I know they were going to work on it when I took these slides decades ago. And I think it's about a third of the floor has been rebuilt by the Italian government as a restoration project. But originally there was, of course, a solid floor of stone over these cages. These were the cages where the gladiators were kept before the fight. They didn't live there, but they were usually the night before the battle, before the event, they were forced to participate in the fights to the death that they had to endure. They would be brought here and at least given, maybe really great food for what might have been their last meal. And then they flooded. I'm sorry, didn't mean to go. I just jumped there on me. This would have been flooded when it was solid stone with really good plumbing to allow them to flood the floor of the Colosseum for those mock naval battles. And here's where the senators sit. They got seats of marble, which isn't really comfortable to sit on. I actually sat there on those just to see what it felt like. So you'd have to have some slave, of course, coming with you. Obviously, they would all have slaves, putting a cushion, for your backside, so it wouldn't be so uncomfortable. And the emperor would have occupied a box seats, right? They had them then about right where this area is, and that's long gone now. Now, did we do the column of Trajan? Because I cannot remember that for sure. Does anybody remember? Because that's on the must-know list, and as I recall, that's one we didn't get to, correct?
I don't think so.
Let's do it now. Well, this is a better view than the one that was in the slide of me because you can see a close-up, but let's go ahead and do the information about the meaning. First, of course, the title. Column.
We did do that one.
We did. Okay.
Yeah, I have it down from last class.
So that's good to know. Okay.
Yeah, I didn't recognize it from this angle, but the first one we only saw the little lower section.
So again, thank you. I appreciate that because that obviously clarifies what you do or don't need to. You don't need to write anything else, in other words, but it is helpful, I think, to see this. Look how tall this. It's a 130-foot tall marble column, but everything above this platform is added in the Renaissance. In fact, that's a Catholic saint up there. I don't know which one. There's so many. I used to be Catholic, by the way. I was raised that way, but I guess the phrase lapsed Catholic applies to my background. Anyway, for whatever reason, the Catholic Church decided to decorate the top, but everything below that platform is almost 2,000 years old, to be exact, more like 19 plus centuries, right? But so you saw the close-up, which I took one of those. It's right above the forum. You see there's some of the ruins of the forum. And the base is original. And then this is where we saw earlier, right? The Roman soldiers crossing the river, and there's Neptune. Yeah, the slides actually that you saw already, one slide, I mean, of this was much more of a close-up. So that's if it's on. I'm not saying I will or won't cut it from the slide list, but if it were to not be cut, and if it's on the midterm, you'll have that close-up view. So now you know what it looks like, the whole structure. Okay. And didn't we cover this or not? I think we did. Then we end with this equestrian statue of Marcus Aurelius. Anybody? If not, then
we did.
Yeah, that one we did.
Yeah, right. About this, by the way, now, again, I think it's a better view, but isn't this close up? So I wouldn't use it on the exam again, if I don't cut this slide from the study list on Monday when we do the review. This is Michelangelo's design for the City Hall, and it became a prototype for city halls all over Italy and even other parts of Europe. A very popular kind of a balance with a clock tower in the middle, right? And, symbolic statues of past Roman, I assume they were mayors or governors, of the region or province around Rome. Not ancient Romans, it's the Renaissance thing. So let's go now to, there's one more must-know I know I didn't show you, and that's the most important slide, but that'll be in about 5 or 10 minutes. So let's go take a walk up on the Palatine Hill. This was the ruins of one of those Roman noble families or senator, which would have had very ornate sorry, I thought we just said someone asked to be admitted. And these houses will go inside. You see they're being restored. In fact, these slides are old enough that most of those are, I don't think they've rebuilt any of them totally, except the Casa Libra, the house of the wife of Augustus. Her name was Livia. I think I mentioned this. They kept separate houses during the, yeah, I'm sure I did on Monday, during the period of the empire. Most emperors had, their own home, and then their wives had a separate home within a, walking distance of each other. And of course, they spent a lot of time together on holidays, weekends, what have you, but they also had their own alone time. And yes, they usually took on other lovers. It was not supposed to be openly, flaunted that way. Some emperors did do that. But they didn't maybe even talk about it. But I think the public knew. Certainly, the upper classes, the educated people in Rome knew that those were. Some people today would use the phrase open marriages. It was a tradition among the upper classes in general, but especially among the emperors. So this is the fresco on the wall of that house, the Casa Libra. It's what's being restored. It's probably been completely restored by now. This one, the lighting was odd, but I liked it because this is the goddess Minerva, one of the main Roman goddesses. And she was a protector of Roman women, or at least upper class. I think all Roman women, one of her roles. And you see the decorative detail, it's really nicely done. Now, this, of course, has probably been touched up to where the colors are sharper and richer, brighter, what have you. Then they were just beginning to restore this villa of the wife of the Roman emperor when I was there. Okay, and this would have been one of the bathhouses. The ruins of the Roman bathhouses were free to the public, and they had 3 temperatures. You can guess how it works. The heated pools were for the upper classes. The lukewarm pools were for the middle classes, like merchants and business people. And then the poor, the masses, had cold baths, but at least now they got towels and soap and a place to wash up if they needed it. And this is part of one of the bigger bathhouses. It's pretty impressive. The Roman concrete technique they used to construct these things is all because they've had 2,000 years now, remember, of neglect, of weather extremes. It does snow sometimes in Rome in the winter, and it definitely gets above 110 degrees in the summer regularly. And then, of course, occasional earthquakes, not severe ones, but they've been shaking, and pollution and wars. And so, of course, many of these are ruins. Now, this is the Circus Maximus. It's what left of what was left, of that. Remember, we saw that was a must know, the cityscape that we saw on Monday, which was a painting of the hill we're on now from a house at the bottom or base of that hill by a wealthy Roman nobleman who owned 2 villas, and the one in the city was at the base of the same hill. And you could see in the distance, if you recall, the columns. Well, here they are all just lying down, but this was that part of that racetrack. And the seating here, which is of course long gone, I'm sure was mostly wooden, would have held up to 200,000 people. The next closest thing is Soldiers Field in Chicago, where I grew up, where the football team plays, right, the Bears, and a few other sporting events and other live. And I saw Martin Luther King speak there in the early 60s. Public events are held. That can hold 100,000, as can a handful of other large American amphitheaters. This could hold twice that many. And that's the view from the hill over the city of Rome. And these buildings, obviously, that's the Roman. We started with the slides there at the beginning of the forum. And that's the Arch of Septimus Severus. Oh, the Senate. That's where the Roman Senate met. And that's really intact. Now let's go down the hill. And the one remaining must know that you will need to take notes on is coming up. That's the Tomb of Augustus. His body disappeared a long time ago. I'm sure not long after the fall of Rome. But it was one of the fanciest tombs ever built in the ancient Roman Empire, and only about half of it is still standing. I'm sure people stole the brick and stone from the other half for building more recent buildings. And this is the backside of it. Look how massive it was. Of course, it was meant to protect his body, and they didn't bury his belongings here. That's a very much of an Egyptian or Mycenaean early Greek tradition. We talked about that with the Aegean and early Greek slides. So the Romans didn't usually do that, but they would sometimes cremate and other times embalm, right, like modern burials do. And I believe that was the second thing, is what was done with his Augustus's body before it was interred here. And so for several hundred years, people could come and look at it, just like you could today if you for some crazy reason wanted to go to Moscow, you could see the embalmed corpse of Lenin. You heard that, right? I get to see that in the Red Square, it's outside the Kremlin. It's been over 100 years. It's been sitting there embalmed in underglass, so people can go look at it if they want to. Okay, this is the, I think, only remaining must know before the midterm. Pretty sure I have that right. So it's an important slide to get some notes on. First, the title, it's 2 words. Ara, that's A-R-A, Pakis, P-A-C-I-S, second word. The location is Rome, and the date is 9 BC or BCE. Let's start with the fact that the title in Latin means the Arch of Peace. But this is a monument to 2 things. It's a monument to the 20th anniversary of Augustus becoming emperor. And we're going to see him and all the next 3 emperors all in one place. It's the only place you can see that in Rome. All in life-size bas-relief figures. You're going to see a close-up. By the way, I wrote my art history thesis on this structure. It was buried for thousands of years, and then sometime in the 1930s it was found while they were digging for a subway. So if you want to, you could add that as part of the meeting. It was rediscovered by excavation for the Roman subway system in the 1930s, and then it's placed in a very secure, you see it's got climate control, and of course access is not open to the public. So it's like a small museum where you can walk all around it. It's fascinating when you know what you're looking at. So let's get up close. This is the view if it's on the midterm that I will have for you. And we'll say who each of these people is. But Arapakis, again, just to make sure you have that, you know, that's an important part of the meaning is what that means and what it was built for. To celebrate the 20th anniversary of Augustus, not just because he became emperor, but of the founding of Pax Romana, which is a phrase that you probably should figure will be of some value to have that, know what that phrase means, even though it's not on a list of terms. As a standalone definition, you know, the era of peace and prosperity and stability started by Augustus that lasted for over 200 years. So this is celebrating 20 years of the peace and prosperity that he initiated with his being the first Roman emperor. There he is. That's Augustus. He's the oldest one in this parade of upper class ruling, if you want to call them ruling class members. That was what the Romans did several times a year. The emperor was expected to walk out into the city streets. Of course, he had bodyguards and protection, and I don't think any of them were assassinated during these events. Maybe attempts were made, but not that I've ever read any successful assassination occurred there. It usually happened inside, you know, if they were assassinated inside their own residence. So here he is out in public in a parade on a holiday celebrating the 20th anniversary of his becoming emperor. It's actually a year late because it took a year to build it. You don't have to know this. He became emperor in 30 BC. So this is like just a little more than 20 years later, but it's meant to celebrate that anniversary. So here is Augustus. And then we can see Livia, his wife, right, who was the empress. And she, of course, was the most powerful woman in the Roman Empire. Her son, Tiberius, most historians, by the way, in fact, it has to be this guy because this guy's too young. He was a depressive. Some say manic depressive, others say just chronically depressed, but he even said that himself, that there are records of these things. The Romans keep records on everything. You don't have to guess about lots of their history. So he became the second emperor, and he was extremely perverted, cruel, and you know, let's just say he punished a lot of people for minor, you know, criticisms and things. He was more of a true despot. Augustus Caesar was a little more enlightened, actually a lot more enlightened than that. Of course, if someone was guilty or accused even with evidence of being, you know, involved in a plot to overthrow him, they got severely punished. But Tiberius was maybe slightly paranoid. He's the emperor that was on the throne when Jesus was crucified, along with thousands of other people. And what would now today be Israel was in a colony of Rome. So that's Tiberius. There's a second emperor. And then the third emperor was Caligula. And that would be him here. Anybody know who Caligula was in the history of Roman Empire? Anything about him? There have been movies about him, plays, and all kinds of books, documentaries. He was the sickest of them all, and that's saying a lot when you come to the Roman emperors. Augustus was a normal, sane, stable human being. Tiberius was less so, but not completely crazy. There's no question that this guy here, right? Caligula was his name, was the most mentally ill of all Roman emperors. He quite literally thought he was a god on earth. I mean, literally, and that he could transform his horse into a god. So he declared his horse a god and made people worship his horse. And he claimed that he would be enshrined after he died. And he had ordered a temple to be built, which wasn't ever built because he didn't last very long. He lasted like 3 or 4 years. Because he was so crazy. He was assassinated by his own bodyguards. But before that, he impregnated his own sister. And when she was 8 months pregnant, he disemboweled her after tying her up because he thought he had a vision that if she gave birth to their child, it would become more powerful God than he was. That's how sick this guy was. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. So you don't have to have seen the Fellini movie about him, right? Federico Fellini, the most famous Italian director, made a film called Satyricon. It's hard to watch. I've never been able to watch it because it's graphic and it shows all of the horrendous things he did to people. Finally, even by Roman standards, he was over the top. So he was assassinated by his own bodyguards. And then this man, they got lucky, became the 4th emperor, and that's sorry, let me get back up to a close-up. That is Claudius. Claudius was one of the better emperors. He was a reformer. He spent money on public works for the poor and working class. He built the harbor of Rome, and he was disabled in several ways. He had a hump. He had polio, so he walked with a limp, and he stuttered. He was born with a stutter, which he never got over. So he had 3 strikes, you could say, against him, but he was declared emperor by those bodyguards, the ones that had killed Caligula, and they did it as a joke. They were going to become, the power behind the throne, but he was way too smart for them. He actually became a real hands-on ruler, and he was one of their better emperors. So they got lucky when he became their 4th emperor. So you see the first 4 emperors of the Roman Empire are here, all in one place, marching side by side on a holiday. So that's the meaning. Yes, these are swastikas. In case you were wondering, some of you may know that swastikas are ancient symbols that almost every culture, including early Native American tribes, the Navajos, used swastikas. It just somehow became a universal symbol, along with the rising sun. Before the fascist use of it, of continuity of the cycle of life. That's what it symbolized. So sadly perverted as it was into the opposite meaning, that only happened after Hitler came along. So there are some swastikas. You see them right there, and that's not anything to do with the Nazis. It's an ancient symbol that's multi-cultural on every continent except maybe Australia. Use confined symbols, the swastika used in some decorative detail. All right, let's do a formal analysis. It's so obviously balanced. I mean, look at this. These figures fill up almost if you draw the line down the middle, right about where Libya is. The rhythm, of course, is very powerful with the heads, hands, the folds of their robes, right? And of course, each figure is balanced too individually, as well as the overall scene. The similar texture is superb. This would have probably been the best sculptor in the Roman Empire. It was hired by Augustus to make this monument. So the carved line is used to create the really realistic cement textures on their face, their hair, their clothing. It's totally stable. There's nothing dynamic about it, except the tops of their heads. They're all standing upright. None of them are running or standing at an odd angle. The largest mass, slightly by a notch or so, Augustus, because you see all of his body. And then I'd say it's a close second between Livia and her younger son, because Tiberius, for whatever reason, even though he's going to be the next emperor, is behind his younger brother. At least most people say it might not be his younger brother. Just say the young man next to Livia. Or Livia could be the second largest. So it's clear that Augustus is the largest, and then these two are second and third. The only technique for space is pretty obvious, is overlapping the figures with each other and the clothing over their bodies. This is a warm yellow color. Let's see if I go back. I think you can see, well, this doesn't quite show it as well as it's a warm yellow marble. And so there's no cool colors, even if it looks cool here. There, that gives you some idea. It's an off yellowish marble. Yellow marble is the most valuable, at least for ancient monuments. And having stood in front of it, I can tell you it's definitely a light yellow color. Okay, let's see. Rhythm, balance. Let's see, modeling, of course, would be the shadows from the sun that you can see all the figures because of the natural lighting, the modeling, because it's surrounded by glass, this display, this small kind of museum. It's really more like a giant glass shed that's over this, but there's other information around it, little placards about the history of each of these people. All right, I think I mentioned the rhythm, the balance, space. I think that's it. Okay. There's a detail of it, by the way, that I took. Okay, now we've seen these, so you don't have to take notes, but I think you'll find this is much more even indicative of why this is the Pantheon. Again, we covered it Monday, but we're going to go inside and see more in depth what it would be like if you ever get the chance to go to this mind-boggling survival of a 2,000-year-old culture. You can see again the columns, how they're massive 60-foot tall columns on the portico imported from Egypt, Egyptian marble. They're dwarfed by the height of the building itself. And then you see the outer walls are brick, but that's only because, again, they were stripped by a pope this time earlier than the Renaissance, I think 1,000 years ago, for several churches in Rome, the marble that used to line the walls. And then here, this whole portico is marble, and it's all pretty much intact. It's only missing a few little sections. And here's Sven. Yep, that was his name. He was a Swedish photographer working for National Geographic magazine. I ran into him twice that time I was in Rome. And he's got his camera with him, and he was 7 feet tall. And I took that picture and asked him to stand there to give perspective to how massive these columns are. And they are nowhere near half as tall as the building they're attached to. So let's go inside. You see the spotlight effect from the hole, the 30-foot wide hole in the ceiling. That, again, remember we covered this, but it's the idea of why that's there is 2 reasons. One is so you could see the gods when you pray to them, or they could see you as you pray. And the other reason is for drainage, because when water came down, it didn't damage the dome or seep into the dome. It would come through here, hit the floor, and we'll see the evidence of that when we see the whole building. That's what it looks like to look up. And this is a 2,000-year-old concrete dome, which has not needed repair or replacement, just basic maintenance. It's mind-boggling. They knew how to build for the ages, quite literally. That's all concrete. These little, I didn't say this, and you'll have to write this now. You have plenty of notes from the Monday lecture on this building, but this is a Roman invention too. Every dome building I've ever seen, including the Washington, D.C. National Capitol building, the Sacramento State Capitol, the San Francisco City Hall, they all do this. The domes are lightened by 50%. Half the weight is reduced by making these coffers, the indentations. It's a simple concept that no one would have thought of before the Romans did. Whoa, 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 whoa. Why did it do that? I don't know. Let's get back to this. Okay, we're going to just see a few more minutes. We'll probably end about 5 after 4:05, but then I'll stick around for questions. And you can see, if you think about it, how if this was solid concrete, it might have collapsed of its own weight, or at least cracked and need major repairs over this 2,000 years it's been standing, but it doesn't, because of how carefully designed and engineered the Romans made it. Here's some more of that effect, and these are the columns that help support part of the dome. The dome itself is resting on the outer walls, of course. And then that's gold. What looks like gold, I don't know if you can tell, that's actually what's left, of course, a much thicker layer that 2,000 years ago was hammered on. It's called gilt, I use that term, I think, with the cityscape, right, slide, of gold being used on marble. Was a popular Roman technique, to make things look more ornate and fancier. There's still some residue of it left from 2,000 years ago. But this is the view that I really like to show, because what you have here is maybe the most amazing thing. Well, the two things. The floor tilts. I think you can tell by looking. It tilts toward the outer wall, so that when the 30-foot wide hole, is being inundated with rain. It rains like crazy in Rome, especially in the summer, when they get a full-fledged thunderstorm. And the water would normally have flooded the floor here, and of course eventually damaged first the dome and then the interior, but it doesn't. It never has, because it was engineered. The water, it never forms more than a thin film as it is, slowly conducted by gravity towards these outer walls, and inside the walls are these openings, along the walls, I should say, which lead directly to the sewers, which lead to the river. So the water is just drained right out. It never floods. But maybe the most remarkable thing is this. These are the original doors. They are 25 feet tall. They are bronze. And this is what blew my mind. I was there in the morning. I heard about this. So I got up early because at 8 a.m. every day of the year, the Catholic Church owns the building. You don't have to write any of this. It's a functioning Catholic Church. And someone from the Vatican, which owns these objects, comes down in a vehicle. Well, now it's probably a electric vehicle. But anyway, back then it was a little Italian car, dressed like a priest to open the church. And he gets out of the car. I watched this happen. He opens this fancy velvet lined box, and inside there is the original key built by the Romans, and then he puts it into the lock on this door and opens the original lock. No WD-40 needed. That is maybe the most amazing detail, that the original lock and key are still being used, and they work fine as well as the day this building opened. So when we say, some cultures built for the ages, like the Egyptians obviously did, and well, to some degree, the Greeks, certainly the Romans did. Okay, let's wrap it up with, that's the Arch of Septimus Severus that we saw earlier in one of the older churches. So let's just round this out with a little hint of how far and wide the Roman Empire stretched. This is in Cologne, Germany. Is one of the Roman walls towers along the wall that protected. Cologne was the largest city in the Roman province of Germany. In fact, the name Germany comes from Latin, Germania. Well, they were Italians, the Romans came up with that name, and that's the root of the modern name of the country, Germany. So about half of what's now Germany was under Roman rule for centuries, and left, of course, a legacy of all kinds of architectural sites, as well as frescoes and mosaics, mostly on the floors of villas that have been excavated. But this is pretty remarkably well preserved. Look how ornate it is. These are Roman decorations in probably marble inserted into another kind of style, or what, a flintstone or something. And of course, the Roman archers would have stood guard here 24/7 to guard the city. Cologne today is what, third largest city in Germany, and it would have been the largest city in the Roman colony. And that's part of the walls. In fact, that's right there. German government put that there as a marker, saying this is part of the walls, and they're survived in a lot, not more than maybe a tenth of the original walls, perhaps up to a quarter. But it's amazing how many cities all around Europe and North Africa and the Middle East still have part of their original Roman walls, and even incorporate them sometimes into their modern structures, their infrastructure. This is in London, and these walls are part of the Roman walls. When London was, again, the name London is a Roman word, Londinium. It was called by the Romans when they occupied what's now Great Britain, all the way up into Scotland. They didn't quite conquer all of Scotland, but they got into part of Scotland, all of Wales, all of England, most of the British Isles, except Ireland. They built cities, and they started London as a Roman, as is Paris. They're both former Roman capitals of those provinces. Well, these walls were excavated by the Nazis. What? German Nazis came here? No, they were bombing the daylights, as you know, if you know your history out of, sounds familiar, doesn't it? Yeah, day and night they bombed London for a whole year, and the Brits wouldn't surrender. So this was with the result of one of the more massive German bombing raids over London in 1940 or 41. It unintended result was that it opened up the foundations of the early Roman wall all the way around London. And so now some parts, since this was taken, I think more restoration has been done, but they decided to leave it kind of just open for people to see with, markers explaining the history of it. It's a pretty close to 2000, and it was Claudius, the one I showed you that was the fourth Roman emperor and one of the more enlightened ones, who conquered Britain. And at least under him, they didn't usually do the most abusive when the rebellions happened, the Brits constantly were rebelling against the Romans, understandably. You know, many other provinces did. Obviously, the Jews in Israel did. They often would capture their leaders, and at least while he was emperor, he made sure they weren't mistreated. And one of them was a woman. You may have heard of that, Boadicea. So to be bodacious, again, see how much of our language comes from ancient Rome, Latin, of course. He respected her enough to say, you know, don't torture, don't, you know, she was just doing what she felt she needed to for her own people. And so she actually, I think she was even given a chance to visit Rome and be welcomed by some people in Rome, if not the whole population. So there were some more enlightened and some less enlightened rulers, as is true of every culture. Okay, and then this is the last couple slides. We'll end in about 2 more minutes. What's left of the Roman bathhouse in Paris, and it's pretty well preserved. Look at the walls are almost intact, and here they've maybe restored or rebuilt the ceiling, the roof actually, but everything else original. These are Roman carved lions, which would have been their, you know, most popular. They had many bathhouses, of course, all over the empire. I don't know if they had more than one in Paris, but Paris was the capital of the Roman province of Gaul, which is the forerunner of the country today that we call France. And this is where they would have had, of course, like I just said, all the different classes could come together and take their, you know, baths in public if they didn't have, you know, plumbing at home. And most of the poor and even middle class didn't have indoor plumbing. The upper classes did. They could have come here and gotten a free bath, and, you know, food usually was also provided, towels and soap that they might not have had at home. And then finally, this is Bath, England, which was an ancient Roman resort. The Romans built the pool, and this is Roman. These are 18th century, from like the 1750s or 60s. So they're new by comparison. This area was rediscovered in the 1700s, as many Roman ruins were, like Pompeii, for the first time since the fall of Rome. Oh, we knew there were Roman colonies all over England, and in Bath specifically was one of their biggest, most prosperous cities under Roman rule. And then it was abandoned, of course, during the Middle Ages and rediscovered in the 1700s. So ever since, it's been a popular tourist site. Well, not just for tourists. The bathhouses or not, you can't swim here, but you can drink the water. Horrible, tastes awful. It's mineral water. It's supposedly good for you. And then there's a restaurant and there's a music venue. It's a major thing, built about 200 years ago. But these are actually Roman, what's left of the Roman era pool that was built by them over 2,000 years ago. I think that's it. All right, so here we go. I'm going to now do the stop share and stick around to see if anyone has any questions about anything, you know, what you just saw, except for the Areopagus. You want to make sure you keep those notes and review them before the midterm. Again, on Monday, that's the whole class. We're going to focus on how the test is going to be. First, cutting down the study list. So you don't want to sign in more than 5 minutes after the start, hopefully by, you know, about 3:08 or 3:10, we'll do that process, and we'll take our time so that everyone has that same information. And if you have to miss that class, I try not to. It's really an important one to help you do your best on and not waste time studying things that won't be on the test. That session will be recorded. The midterm won't. It's a real life, what do you call it? Real life. Live, real time. That's the phrase I'm looking for. It's going to be given in real time, but you'll have till midnight on Monday to fine tune your answers or make changes or corrections. So you do want to be here for that. I'll repeat all this when we get to on Monday to the overview and review, and the information you'll have is not just what is or isn't going to be on the test in terms of the must know slides and the terms to know after we reduce those that aren't going to be, but how the test is going to be given, how it's going to be graded, and therefore how to study for it. But of course, it's open book and open note. Okay, any questions about anything we've talked about today, or anything relating to grades or extra credit from anybody? Anybody? I hope you found that interesting, some of those slides. I know it turns out only one of them was a new must know, but that's one of the most interesting sites that most American tourists don't even know it exists. The Areopagus. Everyone's heard of the Colosseum, right? And maybe the Pantheon. But in any case, at the moment, everything we've covered from Monday, and we actually even began the slides of Rome, remember, late last week. any of those Roman slides until we do the reduction on Monday. I assume it could be on midterm. All right, so now's your chance to ask questions in real time. If you have any urgent questions, anybody? All right, because of my office hours, but ending early, there's nothing wrong with that. Okay, one more time. Last call. Anybody have any questions you'd like me to answer live? Of course, you can always email me during the week, but Saturday, I've said this before, is my family day, so I wouldn't get back to you till Sunday if you email me late Friday. All right, and any late papers, last reminder, if you're one of those had tournament, try to get them in before class starts Monday, preferably even on the weekend, so that they won't have the maximum of 10 points reduced deduction, I mean, for being late. Only 5 points if you get them in before class starts Monday. All right, that's it. No more questions or any today. All right, you guys take care. Have a good week. Bye.
Thank you.
See you Monday.
Thanks, Mark. Take it easy.
Yeah, you too.